Good morning. I wanted to start out by thanking Seafair, AAEA, and the Farm Foundation for hosting such an exciting event with a great variety of topics and all very interesting. And I just want to say I appreciate being part of such a distinguished panel. And I think I'll be moderating, and so I'll just spend a few minutes introducing them now, and so I can just quickly introduce them later. And in no particular order, we've got Luis Rivera here, who is an associate professor at Texas A&M University. He's published on the effects of government agricultural regulations and standards and the effects of downturns on farmers. And I hope no one is disappointed, but Luis is not the Argentine pentathlete of the same name who competed in the 1952, 1956, and 1960 Olympics. We also have Will Martin, Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI. And before that, he's worked a number of places, including the Australian National University and the World Bank. And you've looked at quite a number of things, including trade agreements, climate change, and relevant to here, the effects of food and trade policies on developing economies. And I would point out that Will is not the New Zealand-born classical crossover singer whose debut album went platinum in only 6 weeks. And third on this panel, we have Gopi Munisamy, who is Director of Market and Trade Economics Division in the USDA's Economic Research Service. And ERS oversees research on economic and policy factors affecting U.S. agricultural markets and trade. And prior to ERS, Gopi was a professor at Oregon State University. And Gopi, I hope you are not disappointed, but I was not able to find any other Gopinath Munisamies anywhere on the internet. Okay, and I'm Bill Powers. I'm Chief Economist at the U.S. International Trade Commission. And just what we are is we are an independent agency that, among other things, provides trade policy and trade advice to Congress, the U.S. Trade Representative, and the President. And just as a disclaimer before going further, I have to say that I am here in a personal capacity, not representing the Commission or its commissioners. And also, since we're an independent agency, I certainly can't represent the new administration or Congress. But I have worked with these people for over 10 years, and so have seen their trade priorities emerge and evolve over time. And I want to talk a little bit today about what I think are some important parts of the trade and trade policy debate that we have out there right now, what our ability to provide answers to those questions is, and maybe some of the gaps that would be worth looking into a little further. Okay, and one of the things I want is, and I'm also going to try, when I can, to tie it into the priorities that we have in today's report, and also what my panel is going to be presenting. So let's see if I can get that done in about the next 5 minutes. All right, so the first topic I've got is that there's been a lot of interest in the effects of US trade agreements and trade with specific countries on agriculture, on manufacturing, on the broad economy in general. And it's a topic in high demand, and also I think as a profession, we're pretty good at answering that question. We have a lot of solid sources providing a lot of solid research. The International Trade Commission, for example, last summer put out a report analyzing all of our past agreements on the US economy, including agriculture, and case studies looking at NAFTA. ERS has put out stuff recently looking at the effects of reducing non-tariff measures in trade agreements. And Luis, today you're going to talk, I believe, about NAFTA, trade with Cuba, and trade with Brazil. So we've got a lot of good stuff out there. Your Priorities and Solutions report, if you look at the challenges, talks about the importance of identifying winners and losers from trade. And I think that's what I want to stress. Being transparent about potential losses is increasingly important these days if we want to connect with what the public and what the policymakers are talking about. And I'll give one example where additional work would be helpful. We have lots of great economic analysis talking about the effects of trade agreements. We have lots of great economic analysis talking about what happens to a worker who loses his job, how long they stay unemployed, how much loss in wages they have. We don't have anything that we have very few things that connect those together. Some work tying the costs of displaced workers would be fantastic and very well received. All right, the second topic I want to talk about is investment in offshoring. And those have obviously received a lot of attention in the debate recently. And I'd like to contrast sort of the profession's ability to address those subjects with, say, how well it can address imports. And on the import side, I think the obvious and most notable bit of work lately is Autor, Dorn, and Hansen's looking at the effects of imports from China, and very solid estimates of the effects on lost jobs. And while that specifically looks at manufacturing, I think that analytical approach at regional job losses would be very useful and very applicable to agriculture if you want it as well. Now, so there's some real solid work we have in imports. What about offshoring? And just for convenience, I'm going to define offshoring simply as overseas investment by US companies. Obviously, it has lots more to it than that, but for the time I've got, I'll just talk about investment. And if you look at what the profession has to say about offshoring, largely they say it doesn't have very big effects on US workers. And quite often it says it has small positive effects. And so the question I've got is, which raises the question, if effects are small and likely positive, why is there such suspicion and negative attention on the topic? Right? That's sort of something we can't really answer at the moment. And I think the profession would get a lot of benefit by more closely looking at overseas investment, particularly by industry. I'll just give you an example. If you look at US investment in Canada, it actually is very similar to US investment in Mexico. And you take the data by the BEA, the top 5 sectors of US affiliates in Canada are wholesale trade, which might surprise you, then retail trade, then autos, which gets a lot of attention, then mining, and then food. And so for the room here, 3 of the top 5 sectors I think are quite interesting: wholesale trade, resale trade, and food. And I think I haven't seen any studies that compare this, but I would imagine that the effects on the US of overseas investment in distribution are very different than in autos, which would be very different again in food. And so I think if we're going to try to understand where the negative effects are and really connect with the debate, we need to sort of look more closely at what's going on. And the last item I have, and I'm just going to do this quickly because of time limits. Oh, I got 5 minutes, but I'll get you a little bit ahead, and we'll see if these folks can't use some of the time, is the effects of changes in the global macro environment. And most of this discussion, I think, will be taking up a little bit later. And if you look at the Priorities and Solutions report, it highlights the importance of looking at the effects of changes on income and consumer demand abroad. Those are incredibly important issues, and simply because the magnitudes that we could be talking about, the effects of global macroeconomic changes, as we're all aware, can dwarf the effects of trade with an individual country, or certainly dwarf the effects of trade policy. Not to minimize my own job, but it's true. And so I want to stress that these things can have really large effects on everything: consumers, producers, agricultural workers. And so work on the topic and attention to the topic remains extremely important. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to my first panelist, who is Gopi. Thank you.